panel from the hosted by the Mount Cuba Center, Seeds of Collaboration, Connecting the Pipeline from Collection to Restoration. And I'll pass it off to Elon to lead the panel. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Can you all hear me all right? Someone give me a thumbs up.
Yes.
Great, great, great.
Yes.
I just need to find my slides and my sharing. Just a quick moment. Share my screen. My slideshow. I think this one. All right. Are you folks seeing a slide? Someone said
Yes.
a yes. Yes. Thank you
Yes.
so much. I appreciate it. All right, I'll get going now. Thank you so much for having us and coming to our panel entitled Seeds of Collaboration, Connecting the Pipeline from Collection to Restoration. My name is Elon Alford. I'm a manager of plant conservation science at Mount Cuba Center. And Mount Cuba Center is a native plant botanic garden in northern Delaware. And I wanted to convene a panel to describe a project we were working on, and it was moving one species from the field into a restoration success. And the idea was we just hope it can be an example for folks who may be trying to do similar things. And we wanted to talk about the topic of seed work and it as a networked success model. And there have been many different players that are needed to move a species into the marketplace. So I'm going to tell you the context of our initial thinking. That's my role. And then I invited folks who participated in the collections or the research or the growing, and they're going to present in this order. I'll talk first about that quick overview, and then Sam Hoadley, who's also from Mount Cuba Center, will talk. We'll have Tom Knezik from Pinelands Nursery give us his perspectives, and Dan Behringer from Natural Lands. We're each supposed to give short summaries, really highlighting the perspectives we had on the project. And then Sam and I come back and we'll discuss some quick sighting tips for folks who might be interested in using the species. But really, we want this panel to be mostly group discussion, so we'll open it for questions. Let's get started. So my job on the panel is to set the scene and discuss how we got smooth goldenrod, or Solidago gigantea, introduced into the marketplace. Solidagos are typically considered workhorse species, and so they store well, and they're widespread, and they're adaptable. I'm going to advance my slide. All right, so we all know there's been a national push to improve seed and plant material availability. Much of this work is done from the federal agencies side. And they were often, it seems, working for themselves, talking to themselves, but we all benefit from the information they've been sharing because they externalize that. However, that seems to work really well in the West, especially because there's so much public land out there and owned by federal agencies. However, when you move to the central United States and the eastern United States, the federal presence is just so much lower. And most of our lands are actually privately held. So there may be different ways in which we approach some of the work in getting seeds into the marketplace than the federal agencies might do. But there's also the lessons we've learned from the information the federal agencies have been providing and best practices that we can draw from. So I'm going to tell you a story, and it's just an example of an approach we're using to get more seeds in the marketplace. As a botanic garden, we can't drive all this alone. We need partners. And the partners we found were ones we already knew. We already had trusting and established relationships with these organizations. We just called them up and we discussed an opportunity we have in our mind. And we asked, how can we bring this forward? Would you like to participate? We used these connections to energize the partnership and to get smooth goldenrod into the restoration marketplace. Well, how? We really just relied on our horticultural research program that Sam runs and to indicate a demand signal. And we knew we wanted to get the species out in our own restoration projects as well. So we thought we needed to seek partnerships to bring the plant into the marketplace. So we worked with Pinelands to grow the seed, and we worked with Natural Lands to source some founder seed. And why did we do all this? Well, at the garden, our goal is really to teach people to learn to love native plants and appreciate them so that in turn they can become conservators of natural habitats. So at Mount Cuba Center, we own 1,000 acres. We're in northern Delaware. Much of that is natural, undeveloped areas. Although we do have a botanic garden, it's on about 50 of our acres. So the rest of it is this undeveloped, largely undeveloped spaces. And we have our own restoration projects that we're interested in doing. And we wanted to start thinking about what species we might want to put out in a highlight meadow environment and enhance the habitat for wildlife. So we started thinking about that, and we looked at native species from the Delaware Piedmont that we could think about putting on our list. And we thought we had about 100 taxa. That was kind of desirable to us. But then we went shopping, and we could only find about 40% of what we wanted. So thus, we connected dots internally first. We thought some of what we wanted were goldenrods, but we're not finding that much diversity in the marketplace. And at the same time, we're also working in the garden with Sam's work to talk about the horticultural value. He does all these trial garden reports. And we were able to see from his work that some of the best performing species in his goldenrod trial that was underway were going to end up being straight species. Sometimes we recommend cultivars as our best top performers, but those wouldn't really be appropriate for restoration settings. So when we saw straight species were kind of lining up to be some of the top performers, we thought, well, let's move from just the horticulture and like the ecological value of those species. Let's think about using them in ecological restoration. So the gardens had a focus on introductions, often cultivars in the past. But as we moved to straight species, we thought we saw an opportunity to leverage our existing strengths and use these introductions to also move into the ecological restoration space. And so I'm going to stop here and I'm going to transition to these other folks. The order is going to be Sam. Sam's going to talk for a few moments, and he's going to tell you about like the horticultural trials he did. And then we're going to talk to Tom. Tom's going to talk to us from the nursery perspective of bringing that species into the marketplace. And I know there's been some discussion earlier about nonprofits versus for-profit models. So the garden's nonprofit, Tom's at a for-profit nursery. And then Dan works in natural lands. We really wanted to source genetically diverse materials. So we were looking for partners who may also have this species. All right, Sam, I'll let you take it away. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Elon. Yeah, so my role at Mount Cuba Center is to manage the trial program here. And really what we do in the trial program is common garden studies where we're evaluating large groups of similar plants side by side for multiple years. For perennials, it's a 4-year process. And for woody plants, we're looking at a 5 to 7-year process. But these plants are intensively monitored. There's very limited inputs that we provide to those plants. Beyond the first year of the evaluations, we're not providing water, no fertilization, really no work to the soil, and no pesticides whatsoever. We want to see how these plants perform with a very hands-off approach. A lot of our older trials really focused on commercially available plants. A really good example of that is the echinacea trial, where we're looking kind of at doing a market analysis of what's commercially available and trying to help people make good informed decisions about the cultivars, wild type plants that performed best. But there was a really heavy emphasis on cultivars for the early years of the evaluation. As we've kind of grown, we've started to incorporate other kinds of evaluations where cultivars are maybe not such a central piece. We are starting to do more evaluations on species heavy trials, where we feel that we have an opportunity to promote groups of plants that maybe are overlooked in the commercial horticultural world, which has been our primary audience in the trial garden historically. Most of the time, our results are targeted towards the commercial horticultural industry as well as home gardeners. But as we've started to evaluate more wild type plants, more wild genetics, and starting to bring in kind of novel species or species that really haven't been grown in a garden setting before, we're starting to see that our results have more relevance to a larger audience, not just home gardeners. And it's really our goal to inspire people by these plants and to get more native plants in the landscape. And we're finding that the trial gardens findings, these trial results can have some interesting relevance to the restoration nurseries as well.
All right. Thanks so much, Sam. Tom Knezick from Pinelands Nursery. Give us some of your perspective.
Yeah, so I'm Tom Knezick from Pinelands Nursery. We're a family-run nursery that my parents actually started in 1983, and then my brother and I are fortunate enough to have taken over in the last couple of years. Um, and realistically, when Alon approached us with this opportunity to contribute to some of the work that Mount Cuba was doing, we kind of had to say yes. Um, we're really honored to be approached with that opportunity because Mount Cuba, as you've heard from Alon and Sam, are doing so much to promote native plants here on the East Coast. Um, so like I said, when Alon approached us with the opportunity to contribute to this, we had to say yes. One of the things that I know has been touched on before in other presentations is when you're bringing new plants to market, it's the timeline of how long it takes sometimes, and then when it gets there, is this going to be something that sells for us? That's one of the limiting factors on the for-profit side of the native plant industry is if it's taking up space in our production fields or on our uh, whether it's fields or in our nursery, um, we have to have it cycle through at a regular interval because that impacts our total profitability and then really our resiliency as a company. So with Mount Cuba's proposal to uh, come to us and say, "Hey, we have demand for this plant in our own natural lands. We want Solidago gigantea for our own natural lands. We're going to use X amount of seed a year, X amount of plants a year." It takes away some of the financial risk for us, one, in contributing back to that, and then allows us to contribute to their work, but also say, "Hey, we're going to have extra and be able to offer it to other folks as well." And sometimes in the native plant industry, you get in this echo chamber of we're going to grow what people are asking for, but oftentimes they're only asking for what they know that they can get because they've wanted other things in the past and they just keep getting told no. So, so it's nice to have that outlet right away with especially a reputable and really awesome place like Mount Cuba. So that was really our perspective going into it, is they made it easy for us to say yes because of their reputation. And then it kind of takes away some of the financial risk because, hey, this is gonna go someplace right away.
Thanks so much. You're so kind. Appreciate that perspective. I'm going to move to talk to Dan Berenger. Dan was working in what we call natural lands, and he'll tell you all about it. But we had some seed source on our own Mount Cuba property, but we knew we wanted more, and we knew we wanted more genetic diversity. So we were looking around for other places that might have seed material, the plants growing on their lands, and we're able to contribute to the project. So that's really how Dan ties in. I'll let you go. Thanks, Dan. And I'll advance your slides. Just say next.
Thank you, Elon. Natural Lands is a regional nonprofit land trust that manages more than 20,000 acres of land in eastern Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey, the Lenape-Hocking, homeland of the Lenape. Our mission is threefold: save land, steward land, and connect people with nature. Next slide, please. I manage a 712-acre preserve called Crow's Nest Preserve. For those of you out west, that may not sound very large, but it is significant open space for suburban Philadelphia. We use the preserve to protect natural resources and do environmental education. We divide our stewardship into these program areas. Next slide, please. The seed sharing initiative falls under a few of these program areas, the ones left highlighted. This answers the question, why did we get involved in a seed sharing collaboration? Step one, we believe that in order to know how to steward our resources, we first have to have an inventory of them. And that answers the question, why did Mount Cuba choose us? Because we knew we had the plant that they were looking for. There may be other sites where it was growing, but we knew where to look for it. Next slide, please. We divided the preserve into plant communities based on Gene Fike's book, Terrestrial and Palestrine Plant Communities of Pennsylvania. This allows us to pair the plant inventory with location data. There's nothing high-tech about this. This is a hand-colored map with communities coded to columns in the corresponding spreadsheet. Individual plant locations are not noted, just their presence in each habitat. Next slide, please. We hired a botanist to perform over several years a comprehensive inventory of plant species on the preserve. She lists them in this spreadsheet with tabs for trees, shrubs, vines, ferns, rushes and sedges, grasses, herbs, and mosses, each organized by plant family. Each species is listed as common, occasional, scarce, or not present for each community. With this information, it's not too difficult to find what you're looking for. Next slide, please. Natural Lands has a science policy that we use to evaluate proposals to ensure that research doesn't negatively impact the resources. The seed collection protocol Elon proposed met the terms of this policy. Next slide, please. Finally, the fun part. Elon and collaborators scouted and collected seed at Natural Lands Crow's Nest Preserve. Our contribution was easy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dan. I really appreciate it. I love those photos. That was a great day. It was like drizzly when we were out that scouting. You can also see that field. It looks like so much Solidago everywhere. Well, that field was mixed Solidago species. So it was really important to get that scouting done during the bloom time when you could get those IDs. I'm going to do the last little bit of talking, and then Sam and I are going to tell you about citing the species if you're interested in it. And then we're just going to open the panel up really for the questions. We'll try to advance my slide here. So the thing I want to say is if you're on the east when you're near the mid-Atlantic, go by with this plant. We think it's really cool. One, you have a lot of information from the BONAP maps about how this species is distributed across much of the central and the eastern United States. Our collections were focused from mid-Atlantic, Piedmont, and so Delaware and Pennsylvania collections. And that's the source material that went over to Pinelands. I'm going to tell you about citing the species. I think it should be useful in multiple contexts. I'm a plant ecologist, and when we went out to do our scouting, we found it in basically two types of settings. And I think it's going to be useful in meadow restorations, but also likely like anyone who has to do wetland mitigation work. It has a wet preference. You can see it's called facultative wetland on the Army Corps descriptions. However, it's quite adaptable, and I'll let Sam talk more about that in a moment. During our scouting and collections, we find it in kind of toe slopes, bottomlands area, near saturated conditions, not fully saturated, not standing water, but near. But we also found it in other parts of the fields at Natural Lands in more upland conditions. And so it was kind of adjacent from woodland into meadow conditions, cited in areas that maybe part shade and that a lot of tolerate a little bit more of a drier habitats. So it does seem quite adaptable. And that's where I'd make recommendations. But Sam is the horticulturalist researcher here at Mount Cuba, and I'll let him talk a little bit about siting conditions and maybe, what's the word? I'm going to talk companion plants that might go with that too. Thanks, Sam.
Sure. Thanks, Elon. So yeah, one of the interesting things that we do in our trial garden is that we're basically throwing all of these plants together into a common garden setting, and our soils are what we call kind of average garden soils, kind of clay loam between pH between 6 and 7, fairly moisture retentive, fairly high nutrients, but again, we're not adding anything to it. And when you take a diverse group of plants, many different species, and you throw them all into common garden settings, some plants are going to thrive. They're either adapted to or are adaptable to those garden conditions. Others may not thrive. Others may want wetter conditions or drier conditions. And based on where we had seen Solidago gigantea on our natural lands in kind of these wet meadows where they always have a cool, moist root zone, we were unsure how it would perform in the trial garden, and were surprised to find that it was very adaptable to the average soils. We did see some effects on the plants when we had drier years. Again, we're not supplementally watering. We tend to see that the vigor of the plant is reduced in drier soils. The spread, it is a rhizomatous species, is a little bit slower, and the plants are a little bit shorter. And in prolonged dry periods, there is an increased susceptibility to powdery mildew. Obviously, siting that plant in a wetter habitat can really mitigate a lot of those issues. But that's something that we do try to talk about how it performed in the trial garden, but maybe more importantly, where you can site that plant to encourage a better performance out of it. We found that Solidago gigantea proved to be a very adaptable plant, and again, our common garden conditions, but it also proved to be a very good plant for wildlife. We saw lots of insect activity visiting the species. It's an earlier bloomer for us. So by using that plant with other locally native species of goldenrod, you can have goldenrod flowers for multiple months out of the year. And I think it also is a great opportunity for us to highlight a species that is sometimes lumped into a larger group of goldenrods. The public sometimes sees some of these taller, more quote aggressive species as undesirable, but a lot of that, there's some nuance that's lost that we're trying to reintroduce. All these plants are valuable in the right place, and we think Solidago gigantea is valuable both for common gardens as well as restoration plantings.
Yeah, I was flipping through your report, Sam. If you all haven't seen that, it's where he analyzes different species and tells you how they scored in his trial. One of the species you put up in the description was you see it commonly in nature with was it Vernonia, Nova Angelae? Is that it?
Novoborosensis, yeah, these two are
Novibor
common
sensis.
companion plants. You see them
Thank you.
growing together frequently.
Great. Well, now is audience participation. I'm so excited for y'all. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll ask if folks can put questions in the chat. If our moderators can help us with these. And if we have slow to get some questions, I got some prepared for us. Just let me know.
I can start asking questions. Okay, we have the first question. Have others found similar ratios in terms of what seed species are desired versus available? Are there any notable regions in the US or Canada in which this ratio is higher, so better species available, or lower, worse species availability?
Oh my gosh, Alexis, can you say that again?
Yeah. I'll start with the first part.
Excellent. Thanks.
Have others found similar ratios in terms of what seed species are desired versus available?
I see. I cannot say. I would refer you to the National Native Seed Report and just say that the consensus is we don't have enough availability for enough species, and that's the refrain we hear all the time.
Yeah.
And there's reasons for that. And maybe Tom, you could talk to like not everything grows.
Mhm.
Not everything we know is storable. Not everything we know how to get to germinate. So there's reasons why some of them are available. But then there's other things that it's a question mark, like why Solidago stores, it germinates, why is it not available?
Yeah, and it's actually I went to this conference. It was way back in 2017 in DC, and someone gave a presentation at the very end that outlined, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but there's a significant larger number nationally, a significant larger number of native plants to North America than are in the trade by I think it's like 10 to 1. Um, so I would anticipate that what Alon showed uh, is maybe even worse in other parts of the country. Some of that is because things are just really difficult to grow in a controlled setting. Um, Even things like Lobelia cardinalis or cardinal flower is something that you'd think would be relatively easy. It grows in the wild really nicely, but we tend to struggle with it after a year or two once we get into a controlled setting. Um, and then there's things that are just rare. So I kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, is they're not as common, so the demand for them may not be as great. And then depending on the scale of your nursery or seed producer, there are basically the larger the producer is, the larger the volume of each individual species tends to be for them to consider it. Um, so that's some of it too. And that's, I think some of the really small backyard nurseries may have some really great availability in really small numbers, and they might be missed in some of the polling. But even then, I think if we're hitting 25% of the plants or 50%, I would be pretty impressed if that was the case. That was a long way to answer a pretty simple question, wasn't it? So,
No, I
No,
think it's
that's
a
great.
common question. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think I'll move on to the next question. In mixed stands, how did you mark the target plants?
Well, and let me answer two questions with that. Mixed stands. Well, I'm an ecologist. And this is where I used Seeds of Success protocols for the collections. And what they talk about scouting, confirming your identifications, and that's one of the skills I hold, keying plants. And so we went out to the field looking for plants. Yes, goldenrods can look very similar. There are some key differences about Solidago gigantea. It has a smooth stem, and so often the solidagos are going to have hairy stems. So that was a very easy key. It was very easy for me to tell others when we got to the collecting time, when the bloom's not there and the IDs are harder to do. When we got to collections, we said, look for the hairless stems. And that's the species we want. And I saw there was another question that had come through the someone was asking, is another name for this giant goldenrod, you would think, given that scientific name. It may be. We use the term smooth, and I think in Sam, you in your trial reports, you were talking about its height can be something like 6 to 7 feet. So it's decently tall, but it also lives in these like really moist habitats. Did that answer the question, you think? It's like you need to get out there in the bloom season and do your ID. And fortunately, this was a very distinctive and easy break on this species.
Okay, that's great. Next question. Now that you have gone through this process, are there other species you plan to bring to the market? Anything you would change about the process that you went through?
Yeah, we are thinking, we're always trying to think like, well, how a lot of what we do is informs our horticulture and the horticulture with native species. We call it ecological gardening. But another big part of what we do at Mount Cuba Center is ecological restoration in our natural lands. And so we are interested in sourcing more species that were on our own desirable list. Um, However, we've also been hearing from others who have been engaged with the Northeast Seed Network and their species that's desirable out there. We're trying to cross-reference the things we know we want against things other people say they also want, because we know the demand signal is so vitally important for producers. And so we are screening our interests, those 60 texts that we couldn't find, against things other folks say. So the Northeast Seed Network was one. I think the National Wildlife Federation has a keystone species lists. Those make sense. We've also are trying to screen against databases and information about orthodoxy in seeds. And so some of these species, making sure we're targeting things that are storable. So we're working towards narrowing our next targets, but it does take some time. And what we think is important is being able to find the source. So we don't want to source everything from our own land. We don't always have a big population. So do we know someone who might have it? And is there actually going to be demand on that nursery side? We can say all kinds of things, but what do they think is actually going to be successful? So it's part of that dynamic conversation.
Okay, great. Let's see, we don't have any more questions right now in the Q&A, except a note about going back to the availability. Oh, we just got another question, but I'll relay this note, which is just providing a source for a paper from the Midwest for Zinnan and Matthews, or by Zinnan and Matthews, if you wanted to look up some more info on availability. Next question. How affordable is this ecotypic seed? Is it more expensive than conventionally available seed?
Tom, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, I would say overall, yes. Ecotypic seed tends to be more expensive on a general frame. Some of that is just the scale of production. Probably should have said it more in my introduction to myself is we're primarily a native plant nursery. And on the nursery side, and growing plants for restoration purposes. And on the nursery side, we're fairly large. On our seed production side, we're relatively small when you compare us to Mark Feely from Ernst, who gave a presentation earlier. When you compare us to them and Roundstone and some of the bigger names east of the Mississippi in the seed business, we're like fractions of a percent in scale. Um, so it just costs us more to produce a lot of seed species because we're doing more by hand. We don't have the scale to offset a lot of that the costs that go into it. And then combined, we're in one of the most expensive states to live in the country, in New Jersey. Um, Benefit of that is we're really close to a lot of other places, like Mount Cuba. Even though they're in Delaware, we're an hour and 10 minutes away. We can get to Philadelphia, New York, all these different metro hotspots really quickly. But it drives the price of basically all of our inputs really high. So to generate seed for where we are in the coastal plain or that East Coast Piedmont is just from the scale perspective and location perspective, it's more expensive than other places that can generate at a lot bigger scale. That being said, we have a little bit more flexibility in trying to tackle some of these more interesting species because we don't need to have hundreds of pounds, generate hundreds of pounds. If we generate 5 to 10, that may be enough. Um, so yeah, and I see Peggy Olwell put a comment in there that I think is somewhat about this as well. So yeah, but um, and
Well,
that's in the
Tom,
Q&A box. Yeah.
Tom, let me ask you. You say so. Yes, it's more expensive. Can you give us a estimated
Oh
difference
gosh,
between?
yeah, it's this isn't a current reference, but we produced Panicum Brigatum. This would have been like 2018, I want to say, when we were newer in producing seed, and all collected by hand, all cleaned by hand or with rudimentary cleaning equipment, and with when you factor in all our costs, made a meager markup on it. We were charging about like $40 a pound pure live seed, where you could get that from further west for less than $10 a pound, maybe even less than $5 a pound for switchgrass. So yeah, that's a huge markup. Where we've found is there's different markets and different customers who are willing to pay significantly more for local ecotype than others. Mount Cuba being one of them. There's some folks who really they want to know, hey, this seed source is from really close to where the destination is going to go, where the seed's going to go. And then once you get to the general market, there's an appreciation for local ecotype, but economic maybe not economic appreciation, but a general appreciation. So we found like 25% more is kind of the difference that we can have, like a 25% more dollar wise is what we can charge for a specific local ecotype seed. So, and even with our pricing compared to the general market, we're higher on some stuff, lower on some stuff. It's a mixed bag, and it all just comes down to our individual costs.
Thanks so much. And I think that's also why it's important to us for this demand signal. We can't produce things if they're going to cost too much and no one would want them, right? And so if we can indicate uh, working towards species we think are going to be reasonable to produce. I think, Sam, you also help on the nursery production side. We're starting to provide more protocols about production for folks, just trying to get it just easier to get the species um, for them to grow them so that we can get them for sale so that they're accessible for restoration. I had some questions I wrote, so I'm going to pitch this one to Dan. What excited me about you all was your spatially explicit plant list, and you did talk about it a little bit here. And you said it wasn't highly technical. You didn't use special techniques like GIS. So could you tell us about like why your plant list is made? What other uses it had? I think that's interesting because as an ecologist, it's like, yeah, I know lots of species, but do you really know where to go find them? Like that's what's valuable. So how was it you all had ended up with these types of plant lists?
Thanks. Um, we use it for a number of different things. We are involved in other propagation efforts. We're partnering currently with Fairmount Park in Philadelphia and the Pennsylvania Game Commission to propagate American plum, Prunus americana. So knowing that we have it and where to go look for it, that has allowed us to make that partnership possible. Other reasons to have a good inventory is when we have photo requests. Can you get a picture of such and such plant? Um, the answer is, let me check. And then we know where to look for it. We've also used our plant list to input data into a floristic quality index, which is a web-based tool that allows us to evaluate the quality of the various plant communities that we are mapping. And it has yielded a few surprises. It's a tool that values diversity, devalues communities that have a lot of invasive plants, and yet sometimes the presence of a few invasive plants does not detract too much from the overall value of a section of our forest. So we've been using that same plant list for that. We do also have a few state and federal listed rare species. So we use the plant list, plant inventory, botanical inventory to monitor and track those. And also to help determine which strategies that we're using to manage these habitats are working or not working.
No, that's super.
We have a few more questions in the chat or in the Q&A box now. Let's see. How did you advertise that the seed is now available for purchase in order to offset the higher cost?
So Alana, I'll step in first and say from our
All right.
perspective, we haven't advertised it yet because we're just making sure we can get what Mount Cuba needs to start. But I think going into this year is when we're starting to see if we're meeting the demand that Mount Cuba has for their natural lands, and then it'll spin off from there. So
Oh my gosh, I will say this project is only, did we do this, Dan? Was it 2023? It has not been that long. And we've already, thanks to the great partnership we orchestrated, thanks to Pineland's skill in propagation and growing, I think they're just now coming into the marketplace for availability potential. So I think that really depends on you. Others have talked about like that time lag between what do you want and when can you get it. It does take years, and I think this has been a kind of an exceptional case of like quick turnarounds. So there hasn't been yet much marketing about it. Um, but that's why I wanted to put up that slide. I think it's going to be highly valuable, which I would love to see it um, in the environmental consultants toolbox for wetland mitigation, one. Two, I think it's highly valuable for these wet meadows where we're just trying to enhance in the eastern United States. And then Sam has just now recently released the Solidago trial. So often we're releasing a species-based trial reports once a year. So it's just now kind of hitting the shelves and getting some traction out there. But I also don't think that it's necessarily something that Mount Cuba would be, I guess, externalizing much more because it's now this product for Pineland. So like, we're happy to like talk about like everyone needs a species and why, where it makes sense. But it's in the commercial marketplace. It's available. And I think what's really cool is we have this nice suite of literature that Sam's been able to put together on his trials. So it would be really informative for folks who want to learn more about the species, how it's done. Mount Cuba, we're interested in the ecological gardening as well. So folks gardening in their backyards and things like that, really in enhancing species diversity across different habitat types, even urban settings. So using it in those types of ways is what's exciting to us. I don't know if you wanted to chime in on much, Sam, on like commercialization.
I mean, for our part in the trial garden, doing the research is part of these trials, but then talking about what performed well is another big piece of it. And producing the research report, which is basically a pamphlet, which is also available on our website if you're interested under our research tab. But we also spend a lot of time on the road talking about these things, telling these stories, trying to drum up excitement, and trying to connect the loop as much as we can. That admittedly is on a relatively small scale, but we are seeing some traction and some demand being generated from these reports and from some of these speaking engagements. And we're really just excited to spread awareness about these native plants. Hopefully, we're also making some progress in some of our problems that we've had up to this date, up to this time, where some plants that we have promoted ended up not being available by the time the report was put out. So trying to connect the dots, working with people like Dan and Tom and Elan to try to really kind of complete this circle so that then when we put out these research reports and hopefully generate some demand and interest in these plants, people will be able to buy these plants, whether it's for a restoration project or for their home garden. So there's really no purpose in putting out this information if people can't take action. So that's really, for our part of it, where we are trying to promote these things. We're certainly not like, taking out flyers or putting up billboards or anything like that, but we are trying to talk about them and trying to generate some grassroots interest in these species.
Yeah, and I guess I'd say too, Dan, you talked about the sourcing side and some of the opportunities. I think that was part of the calculus maybe you all had about why it would be attractive, although it fit into your parameters of things you could say yes to. You also have some interest in it.
Right. We're growing the plant anyway, and we're happy to share a small fraction of it just to see it get out there. We think it's a neat plant, and we're thrilled to see other people grow it.
Okay, that's great. Ready for the next question? Let's see where we've gone. As a follow-up, did you have buy-in from other local entities you knew or assumed would be interested in supporting this before growing?
That's a great question. No, I think the buy-in was really the internal and between like the four of us here. So knowing Mount Cuba would want it, knowing that natural lands would likely want it in some places was helpful. That's definitely a place we could do more outreach to others. But I will say, like in the horticulture world, especially native plant horticulture, Sam's and Laura's trial garden reports are like hot items. So people love this stuff. And we've seen a lot of requests to buy material that come out on our top performers list. And I'll let Sam tell this anecdote about, was it Carex woodii? We've seen a lot of demand signal from these trial reports. So we're hoping that indicates that this species be successful.
Yeah, so Elan talked about Carex woodii. We put out a Carex report a few years back, and most of those Carex were commercially purchased at the beginning of the trial. And we had been doing a little bit of networking with nurseries to kind of give them a heads up that, these things are performing well. This is a plant we might want to be paying a little more attention to. And when we released the report, Carex woodii ended up being a phenomenal plant in the garden. Basically, was tolerant of every condition we threw at it in the trial garden, including mowing of all things. We think it actually has potential to be a lawn substitute. But so you have this great plant, and all of a sudden, when we released this report, demand skyrocketed, and the few nurseries that sold it sold out immediately. And this is a problem for us and for the nursery industry. There's all this demand on the table. People want to buy this plant and they can't. So we really want to be able to promote plants that people can put into their gardens. Nurseries want to be able to sell plants. If they know they can sell them, they're going to grow more of them, as Tom has mentioned. So that was a big lesson for us, understanding that some of these results were actually driving demand and sending signals to the market, and people were paying attention to what we were saying. So with that lesson in mind, we spent a little bit of time talking to people like Tom and like-minded nursery people in our region to try to understand how we could be better partners, how we could share information and seed material, potentially divisions of plants, in a more preemptive manner, so that we can hopefully try to get ahead of some of these demand curves and maybe produce things ahead of when the results are going to be released of certain trials. But that's a moving target, and certain plants are going to be really great fits for certain nurseries, others won't be. So that's another thing that we're working on, trying to diversify our partners a little bit so we can have each of these plants that we might be promoting might have a good fit amongst our various partners. But all that came with lessons of how much lead time is necessary, and for that reason, we actually ended up delaying the goldenrod report by 2 years, so we could give Tom and Pinelands a little bit of time to bulk on these plants, to get some seed produced, so that by the time the report was released, hopefully there was some supply to meet potential demand.
Hey, that's great. Thank you. We'll go with Steph's question. Solidago gigantea is a widespread, fairly common species that isn't difficult to establish. Why do you think it wasn't already commercially available? And building off previous questions, hearing more about your specific thoughts about outreach or marketing strategies for species perceived as weedy or allergens would be interesting. Which is a question we haven't quite gotten to yet.
Yeah, so I'll let Sam, I feel like you can handle
Yeah,
this question for sure.
sure. So I think one of the things that our trial is starting to really try to highlight is the fact that there's a lot of nuance to the native plant world. And I think sometimes goldenrods are a great example of that. A lot of people know what goldenrods are, even non-plant people. I feel like they're in the same category of everyone knows what a peony is, everyone knows what a hydrangea is. And when most people see a field of goldenrod, they know what they're looking at, or in general terms. But what they're actually seeing is a diverse group of plants that all behave differently, all have different qualities. And what we're trying to share with these trial results is not just common garden performance and plants that performed well in our trials, but also just sharing a little bit more information about what these plants actually are, and what makes them different and what makes them special. And it's of our opinion, at least in the trials and at Mount Cuba Center, there's no bad species, regardless of trial performance. It's all about citing that species correctly. And some of these larger, more aggressive species might be better suited for naturalistic gardens or restoration projects. Other plants are maybe more suited for smaller home gardens. But we often found that some of these taller, more aggressive species were kind of lumped into this Solidago canadensis bubble that people are scared of. They don't want to deal with Solidago canadensis or this idea of Solidago canadensis. But really what people are talking about with Solidago canadensis, it's several species. There's Solidago canadensis, altissima, and gigantea. And of those three species, we found that Solidago gigantea was the most friendly to a common garden setting. But it's, again, one of those species that can kind of work both ends of the spectrum. Great for restoration, and great for common garden settings. And it's been there the whole time. And I think just educating people about what's in our backyards, how these plants can be valuable, and kind of looking at our local flora and our local resources in a different way is something we're really trying to promote and generate some excitement about, and hopefully getting people to look at plants in a different way. And even in our research reports, this is not a research trial result at all, but just showing people that goldenrods don't cause allergies, that was a big goal of this trial. And if that's the one big take home people get from this evaluation, that's great. And maybe people will be more receptive to including a goldenrod in their home garden. So we know they're great garden plants. We love them at Mount Cuba Center. We love them in our natural lands. And we also know they're wonderful for wildlife. So they checked all the boxes for us. They're beautiful, valuable, and hopefully going to increase the wildlife value of someone's home garden or restoration site.
Yeah, and I'd say what's really been fun about working with Sam is my background is ecology, restoration, conservation. I don't have any horticulture training, and I work at a botanic garden. And so sometimes I feel like an oddball at our garden, but it's the ability to persuade, I think, that the trial reports are really doing for us. And we don't really have that maybe need in the restoration field because we all agree typically like more diversity is better. What species can we get? But what's really great about the trial reports we're putting out is trying to talk to multiple audiences. Um, Not every species belongs in every location. And so how do we attract interest? And I think the horticulture world does that really well, describing plants, telling people what to expect, how it's going to act here, where you might be able to put it there. We don't always ask those questions in restoration at the same level or think about communicating that out to the community. So that's what's I think is really exciting about this type of relationship.
That, excuse me, that's great. Gosh, we've got a couple more questions in the Q&A box and a little more time, so we'll keep going. What are some of the biggest challenges for getting folks excited about uncommon landscape plants, especially in urban areas where formal or traditional gardens are more common?
I think I would ask Sam and Tom. I feel like you all work in those spaces. That's not really a space I work in. Thanks.
I mean, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but we are seeing, or if you're seeing a similar thing, but we're seeing an increasing demand from the average home gardener for plants that do more than just provide ornamental qualities to their garden. They want something that's going to potentially be able to support wildlife at home. They want to be part of the solution, even if it's at a small scale. So I think there is a good amount of interest there. And when you can promote plants like ironweed, like goldenrod, like pycnanthemum that have tremendous ecological value, and maybe there's all of this untapped potential in species diversity that maybe people don't know about, people get excited when there is that kind of potential. And I think that's a side of the horticultural demand that I hadn't really realized was as strong. But I think the desire to create an ecologically sound small home garden is a growing trend or a growing desire from home gardeners.
Yeah, I completely agree, Sam, that a lot of home gardeners who want to be really hands-on want their garden to look beautiful, but they want to give back too. Um, Now, I think from a challenge perspective is uh, what those there's a new perception of what beautiful is that some communities don't appreciate yet. So you may be someone who wants to garden ecologically, but your community hasn't accepted that yet because it looks different, and so that change can be difficult for some people. I'd say that was the biggest challenge that I've seen and heard about. Um, but it is changing, and then as more and more people are interested in this kind of gardening, they're or gardening with native plants, they're getting into positions of power on their HOAs or in their communities and or on their environmental commissions, and it's becoming more acceptable to communities that way. So I would say that was what I've seen for biggest challenges.
Yeah, it's really great that's what I love about this one taxon. from that report. It was a straight species. It performed well. We're going to promote it for horticultural value. Sam and Laura's reports also describe ecological value because they look at the phenology of the bloom. They look at the pollinator visitation. So that's really valuable to people. But that's not the world I work in. And I want species we can put out in the field over vast areas. And so that's what the species really had. This is kind of this dual-sided demand, we think, and interest. I don't know if Dan, you had any thoughts because you all get guests that come through the natural lands properties and maybe how you interact with them.
We try to use our preserves to show off some of these native plants in garden settings so that people get used to seeing them in garden settings. We're big fans of Doug Tallamy from University of Delaware, and sort of the insects that make use of all these plants. That's how you create the habitat. We encourage people to use a field of dreams model, build it and they will come. If you plant the plants, you'll get the insects, you'll get the wildlife that follows, as Dr. Talamy advocates. And so this is just one more plant that really supports wildlife.
Okay, great. Let's do another question. Andrea Kramer is asking if you could talk more about how you sourced material for the plants now in production. Did you mix multiple sources or just collect from one source?
Yeah, for production, we mixed sources. I think in Sam's trial, we had an original small collection that we accessioned at the garden, and the intent was let's just study it and then write about it. But when we saw that it was going to be quite successful, we decided to source from multiple locations. And that decision really came from knowing that genetic diversity is valued in the restoration community. And then it also was reinforced when I went on our property to look for the species. So we also had a somewhat spatially explicit plant list for our property, Mount Cuba Center. And we went out to the meadow, the wet meadow it's supposed to be in. And I thought, this not going to be enough. So where else can I find some? Who else can help me? I think that's really important. And so we just started picking up the phone and calling around. But this is mixed sourcing from northern. I think you'll have to tell me what ecoregion you're in, Dan, but we're in northern Piedmont here in Delaware.
We're the same, the Piedmont.
How about one more question? That sound good? Maybe this was a little addressed, but because it's going back to outreach and what kind of outreach do you do? I grew up in New Jersey. I remember anything that flowered was something everyone was convinced would give them horrific allergies. It seems more people are aware of the benefit of native plants, but do you have specific outreach to correct misinformation?
Oh my gosh, do your friends listen to Native Plants, Healthy Planet? No,
Great
I
podcast.
would say it's great. No, yeah, I don't work on our marketing team. So who I speak to, it's scientists, horticulturalists. It's not my skill set, but I do think, yeah, this is exactly the question we've gotten multiple times, multiple places. So, like, how do we keep promoting? How do we make our scientists accessible? How do we make our plant people? I think they're often real introverts, right? So let's just get out there and tell our cool stories. But I'll let maybe Sam and Tom talk about that.
Yeah, I can contribute just a little bit. We do try to share our trial results through multiple avenues. Social media reaches a lot of people. I'll go to native plant conferences around the eastern United States, mostly northeastern and midwestern. Talk about our results, try to generate interest. Garden clubs, master naturalists, master gardeners, visitors, people who are interested in taking tours. We'll talk to just about anyone who's interested and just trying to share that excitement and spark interest in these native plants.
Yeah, for us, we do a fair amount of outreach, not necessarily to address misinformation. Um, but Alon mentioned it, Sam mentioned it. We have a podcast that myself and our sales manager, Fran, co-host called Native Plants, Healthy Planet, which is basically a way to surround ourselves with really smart people to make people think that we're a little smarter, I guess. But but really we learn a lot through that. And that's probably our biggest source of outreach because we get a couple thousand listeners a week on that on different topics. And we do address a lot of misinformation in that way. I think unfortunately it's usually going to people who already know the correct information in that case. But and then we're in an interesting spot since we're providing plants and seed to restoration projects. Um, Most of the time we aren't reaching out with and this kind of answers the question from earlier too. We're not saying, hey, you should really plant this plant because the landscape architect or Army Corps of Engineers or whoever was in someone else was deciding what plants were suited for that site. And then they're telling us this is what we want because this is what through our plant surveys and all that, this is what should work here. And then going from there. But I'll chime in too because I said another comment about it is the Mount Cuba reports really do drive a lot of demand for those for different plants. And we were caught up in the Carex woody eye thing where we didn't grow it, and there was nonstop phone calls for a week of people asking for that. So that is a really big source of outreach in the Mid Atlantic and Northeast for native plants.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, panelists. I think we are at the end of our first day of our virtual Native Seed Conference. Thanks, everyone who stuck around for the whole day. And nothing much to wrap up on except that we'll see you tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. And it'll be a great day to kind of talk more about collaboration and community and strengthening our connections with each other. So, and we will save the chat from today, and make that available for folks later. And then, yeah, reach out if you have any other questions or concerns, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great evening.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Elon.
No, I'm trying to thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
Morgan, thank you. See you all.
Just letting folks say their final thoughts or anything in the chat, and then we will end for the day. Better save this chat too.